Hello viewers. Today we will be discussing the topic Development, Social Welfare and the State in India. A study of the educational policies. We already know that the Constitution of India contains a number of directives to provide for a welfare state in India. In fact, since independence, India is committed to the development of a welfare system. In order to bring about all-round welfare of the people, the Government of India from time to time, on the basis of the constitutional directives, have embarked upon various programs of social welfare and plans of action. These programs try to bring about welfare of the people by focusing on areas such as education, employment, social security, food security, and so on and so forth. Today, we will be discussing one such social welfare policy area, and that is education. You will definitely agree with me that education is considered to be the basis for the building up of a strong society. Hence, an able educational system can bring about a massive transformation in the society as well as in the political and economic system of the country. We should also understand that education system cannot be studied in isolation. Rather, educational policies should be studied in tune with other policies such as employment, market, economy, and the like. Let us try to understand the educational objective of the government through a study of the constitutional prerogatives, and then we will be focusing on the major national educational policies of 1968, 1986, as well as 2020. Now, before we move on to the specific educational policies, we should try to understand what is the aim of educational policies in a welfare state. The first aim of educational policies is to bring about social change. The second aim of educational policies is to bring about certain transformation in social norms as well as holistic development of individual personality. The third and the most important aim of educational policies is to create a trained workforce which would contribute to economic development and growth. These are the three aims on the basis of which major educational policies have been drafted in the country from time to time, the latest being the National Education Policy of 2020. Now, we need to understand that after independence, education became the responsibility of both the state and the central government. Because the Constitution not only emphasized upon the principle of equality of educational opportunities, but also the achievement of social justice through a policy of affirmative action through reservation. In India, educational policies have been closely influenced by educational commissions that were set up from time to time. Let us now take a sneak into the different educational commissions and the recommendations that led to the creation of various educational policies in the country. The first educational commission that was set up was called the University Education Commission, which was created in 1948. This University Education Commission was also popularly called the Radhakrishnan Commission. The purpose of this commission was to create and provide for certain recommendations to aid higher education. This commission recommended encouragement of formation of universities, creation of an educated electorate, and a youth which would contribute to the national workforce of the country. Thereafter, another educational commission was created, which was called the Secondary Education Commission of 1952. This commission emphasized on diversification of education and emphasis on the creation of multi-purpose schools. The next education commission which was created was the Indian Education Commission between 1964 to 66. This commission was popularly called the Kothari Commission. The Kothari Commission provided for a number of recommendations. Among this was the evolution of a national system of education. Based on the recommendations of the Kothari Commission, the first national educational policy was created in the year 1968. Let us try to understand the main features of the National Education Policy 1968, which is considered to be the basis and foundation of all educational policies that was framed after that. The National Education Policy of 1968 suggested compulsory education for children between 6 to 14 years. This policy also suggested encouragement of regional languages in schools. English had to be the medium of instructions in schools, Hindi to be the national language, and emphasis on the use of Sanskrit as a symbol of India's cultural heritage. Thus, this policy emphasized on the three-language formula and emphasis on education through regional languages. This commission also focused on education through mother tongue. It also focused on the fact that we need to increase our national spending on education and hence recommended that 6% of national income should be spent on education. Thereafter, another educational policy was framed in the year 1986, which is called the National Education Policy of 1986. Now, this particular policy brought about major changes in the educational curriculum across the country. This policy proposed a national system of education based on the accepted structure of 10 plus 2 plus 3. Regarding the breakdown of the first 10 years, it suggested an elementary system comprising of 5 years of primary education, 3 years of upper primary education, followed by 2 years of high school. Then it was the plus 2, which refers to class 11 and 12, which was also a part of higher education throughout the country. Plus 2 was followed by graduation of 3 years and a system of post-graduation of 2 years. This was the system of educational structure suggested by 1986 and which continued for very many years. The national system implied that up to a given level, all students irrespective of caste, creed, sex, location have access to education of a comparative quality. Now, the national education system understood that there were certain problems associated with education, and one major problem was access to education and dropouts. So, it was important to come out with an education policy which would retain students as well as engage them in the active learning process. Hence, National Policy of Education 1986 focused on certain core principles to be followed by educational institutions across the country. The first principle was access, enrollment and retention of all children up to the age of 14 years in school. So, access to education, ensuring that they remain in the system, and there would be a system of compulsory enrollment for all the children in schools. The second principle that they focused on was quality. It was essential not only to focus on increase in enrollment of children, but focus should also be on quality education. Quality improvement of education by focusing on the school environment, bringing about activity-centered and child-centered educational system, bringing about major changes in teaching methodology, continuous evaluation throughout the year, removal of all kinds of physical punishment, continuing the practice of not failing students in any class at elementary level, as well as arranging for essential facilities in primary schools. So this was the core idea behind compulsory education at the school level. The next important aspect was focus on non-formal schools. It was accepted that many children would not have access to formal educational institutions. In order to cater to this need of students who cannot go and study in formal institutions, access to non-formal schools was emphasized for children who left schools in between or who resided in places where schools were not available. The third thing that this educational policy emphasized was teachers and teachers' education. The policy suggested that district institutes of education and training, which was called DIET, need to be established with the capability to organize pre-service and in-service courses for primary and secondary teachers. The National Council for Teacher Education should be provided the necessary resources and capability to accredit institutions of teacher education as well as provide guidelines for teaching curriculum and methodology. Now, one very important point that was stressed in the 1986 policy again and again was non-formal education, because it was visualized that automatically some children would drop out after a few years of studying. And hence, for school dropouts, it was suggested that there would be a systematic form of non-formal educational institutions to be created. And these non-formal educational programs would be at par and of comparable quality with formal educational institutions. The responsibility of running these non-formal educational institutions and programs was vested with the voluntary agencies and various Panchayati Raj institutions. Thus, non-formal education was to be ensured by the local governing institutions. In order to implement the core principles of 1986 education policy, the government from time to time enunciated a number of plan of action. The first plan of action that was enunciated was called Operation Blackboard, that aimed at improving the human and physical resources available in primary schools. Operation Blackboard, which came about in 1987-88, focused on physical infrastructure in schools. A minimum blackboard in all schools was an essential criteria for imparting education, and this was emphasized and popularized through Operation Blackboard. The next plan of action was restructuring and reorganization of teacher education, which created a resource for the continuous upgradation of teachers' knowledge and their core competencies. The third program of action that was emphasized was minimum levels of learning in 1991, which laid down levels of achievements at various stages and gave emphasis to revised textbooks. Textbooks would be revised from time to time to ensure that children had updated knowledge about different subjects. District Primary Education Program came up in 1993 that emphasized on decentralized planning and management, improved teaching and learning materials, and school effectiveness. Emphasis was given on the school and the infrastructural resources in order to ensure that there was an improvement in the teaching learning system. The next program of action that was emphasized was the National Program for Nutritional Support to Primary Education. This program provided for cooked meals every day for children in classes from 1 to 5 in all government and government-aided schools. The purpose was to ensure that nutritional deficiency in children going to elementary schools can be done away with, and they also have access to food security at the same time. So food as well as education was guaranteed through this particular program of action. Now, after a couple of years, the government established a review committee to find out the efficiency and effectiveness of this particular policy. Now, Acharya Ramamurthy was entrusted with the task of reviewing the policy and finding out the loopholes in the policies and suggest certain improved plan of action. The report of the Ramamurthy committee put up in 1990 was called and titled Towards an Enlightened and Human Society. The committee made a number of very useful recommendations. First, they suggested that even the private schools should be converted into common schools to remove social, economic, regional, and gender disparities. So, the private school should also be brought within the parameters of quality holistic education. It suggested that there must be some concrete programs for scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, women, and the marginalized communities. It further suggested that there should be adequate funds to improve the basic structure as well as the quality of primary education. Primary education must be in mother tongue and the aid to schools providing in other medium should be stopped. This was also suggested by the Ramamurthy committee. The recommendation of the committee provided a base to develop a new program of action which was popularly called the Revised Program of Action 1992. Now, the revised program of action emphasized more on quality than on quantity. It recommended a more comprehensive Operation Blackboard to enhance its coverage to upper primary level. Please note that the Operation Blackboard program, which was introduced in 1987-88, focused on infrastructural resources at the primary level. Post 1992, Operation Blackboard now focused on infrastructural improvement in the upper primary level. It recommended a minimum 50% female teachers in future appointments in all schools. Informal educational program for the educationally deprived and working boys and girls and computer education to as many schools as possible. Thus, we need to know that computer education started off after the revised plan of action 1992 was put into force. It was also proposed that elementary schools would be open throughout the year so the students can have an all-round development through the education and the learning teaching system. Let us now come to another landmark in the development and universalization of primary education in India. We all have heard about the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. The Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan came in 2001 with the basic aim of universalization of primary education. Education for all was the chief motto of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Apart from universalization of education, it also focused on decentralized specific planning and implementation strategy by community ownership of the schooling system. Thus, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan focused on more community participation when it comes to focusing on providing education to all and ensuring education for all. As mandated by the 86th Constitution Amendment Act, making free and compulsory education for all children between 6 to 14 years, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan aimed to implement an institutional system which would provide for sustainable financing, community ownership, institutional capacity building, improving mainstream educational administration, at the same time ensuring that the educational system was accountable as well as transparent. Priority was given to girl child education and focus was on the participation of children from scheduled tribes and scheduled caste communities. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, also like the 1986 policy, focused on access, enrollment and retention of children at the primary level. We have another landmark in the development of education in India, and that is the National Curriculum Framework drawn up in the year 2005. The NCERT prepared the National Curriculum Framework to provide a broad framework within which teachers and schools can choose and plan experiences that they think children should have. NCF focused on the principle learning without burden. A number of focus areas was put forth and emphasized in NCF 2005. First thing was enhancement of language skills. Students should have a first language and the second language, and they should also develop skills in a third language also, so that they could be conversant in all the three languages, which would also help them to get jobs in the long run. Mathematics was given priority and importance. But it was clearly laid down in the NCF that the teaching of mathematics should enhance children's ability to think and reason, to visualize and handle abstractions, to formulate as well as solve problems. Another important area that was emphasized was science education. The purpose of science education was to engage the learners in acquiring methods and processes that will nurture their curiosity as well as creativity. Social sciences was also another area of focus, but they clearly laid down that when students study social sciences, the focus should be on conceptual understanding rather than memorizing facts and reproduce them in the examination. The study of social sciences should also equip students to think independently. Finally, another important area of study that was focused was environmental education, or EVS as it is popularly called. Environmental education would seek to bring about awareness and consciousness among the children about the environment and the notion of sustainable development. Thereafter, another major landmark was the Right to Education 2009. This was a part of the constitutional amendment bringing in Article 21A, which provided for a right to free and compulsory education to all children between the age of 6 and 14 years. The Act specifies that all private schools reserve 25% of seats to children of socially disadvantageous groups. Thus, this Act not only puts a responsibility on the government and government-aided schools, but also brings in the private schools within the ambit of right to education. It also laid down that no child shall be held back, expelled, or required to pass a board examination until the completion of elementary education. Under this Act, for school dropouts, there was provision for special training. Since education is a concurrent list item in the Indian Constitution, the responsibility of implementation of right to education have been distributed among the center, state, as well as local government bodies. The central government bears 70% of the expenses of the implementation of the Act, and 30% is provided by the state governments. This Act also provided a corresponding fundamental duty, Article 51A Clause K, which provides an obligation upon parents to ensure that their children go to school every day. Thus, this Act seems to bring down and cut down on the child labor problem in the country. Let us now move on to the most talked about and most debated education policy, and that is the National Education Policy of 2020. We have already studied that the National Education Policy of 1986 has governed the entire structure of Indian educational system from 1986 to the current period. However, a lot of changes had happened globally, and hence it was time to bring about structural changes in the Indian education system. It was also felt by a section of the academicians that there should be a Bharat-centric education system which would try to address the global changes as well as maintain a certain system of indigeneity in the national education system, and which we can purely call as Indian system of education. In 2015, India adopted the Global Education Development Agenda reflected in the Goal 4 of Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda for Sustainable Development 2030, which seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. Thus, NEP 2020 seeks to achieve this aim of inclusive, accessible, quality, lifelong education by 2030. Keeping all these ideas in mind, a committee was set up to start discussions and prepare a draft report on education policy under the chairmanship of Mr. T.S.R. Subramaniam in 2015. The committee took views of the several stakeholders and had elaborate discussions right from the Gram Panchayat level to the central government. This was for the first time that a national education policy was being drafted, which was not imposed from above, but it was a bottom-up policy which tried to take into account the feedback provided by all stakeholders across all rungs of society. When the draft was placed in public domain for discussion, a lot of issues emerged. In order to look into those, a new committee was set up under the chairmanship of Dr. K. Kasturirangan in June 2017. Kasturirangan committee considered all the suggestions as well as the objections raised on the basis of the draft policy and further prepared a new draft which was made public again on May 31, 2019, and further suggestions were accommodated. After reviewing the suggestions, the committee finalized the policy and we got our new policy in the name of National Education Policy 2020. Let us now take a look into the vision of this policy. National Education Policy highlights the following areas of importance. It envisages an education system rooted in Indian ethos that contributes directly to transforming India, that is Bharat, sustainably into an equitable and vibrant knowledge society by providing high quality education to all and thereby making India a global knowledge superpower. The second thing that it emphasized was the curriculum and pedagogy of our institutions must develop among the students a deep sense of respect towards constitutional values, fundamental duties, bonding with one's country, and a conscious awareness of one's roles and responsibilities in the changing world. The vision of the policy is to instill among the learners a deep-rooted pride in being Indian, not only in thought, but also in spirit, intellect, and deeds, as well as to develop knowledge, skills, values, and dispositions that support responsible commitment to human rights, sustainable development, and living and global well-being, thereby reflecting a truly global citizen. Now let us come to the main highlights of NEP 2020. The existing 10+2 structure, that is class 1 to class 12 in school education, will be modified with a new pedagogical and curriculum restructuring of 5+3+3+4 covering ages 3 to 18. Now let us see how these stages will be done into schools. This means that the first 5 years of school will comprise the foundation stage. The next 3 years will be divided into preparatory stages, that is from classes 3 to 5. Later there will be 3 years of middle class, which is middle stage, which will be classes 6 to 8. And 4 years of secondary stage, which is classes 9 to 12. So this is the structure of the school level education under NEP 2020. Now we need to understand that NEP 2020 focuses on some other changes in the school curriculum. Another important area that it focuses on flexibility in choosing streams, which means that students can choose subjects across stream. So the conventional idea of science, humanities, commerce may be decompartmentalized to give students greater flexibility in choosing different subjects at the high school level. Diluted board exams. Board exams to test only core competencies could become modular in the coming years and may be offered twice a year. So twice a year we will be having board exams for students. 3-language policy should continue. That means multilingualism is still the policy of education in NEP 2020. However, NEP 2020 says that preferences would be given to local language at the school level. Bagless days. This is very interesting and unique also. School students to have 10 bagless days in a year during which they are exposed to a vocation of choice. This is some kind of an internship opportunity that will be given to school-going children. Let us now come to college and university level institutional changes. The first change that has been recommended is transformation from a 3-year graduation system to a 4-year degree system, wherein students will have the right to exit at different levels. Moreover, a student who completes 4 years degree course will have to do or pursue 1 year post-graduation. So post-graduation will now on be 1 year if a student avails of a 4 years course. Multidisciplinary curriculum is being emphasized, where the focus is on various streams regardless of the honors or the major courses studied or taken up by a student. There is another important recommendation, that is fee cap. Proposal is there to cap fee charged by private institutions of higher education. National Testing Agency will conduct common college entrance examinations twice a year. Top-rated global universities to be facilitated to come to India, and top Indian institutions will be encouraged to go global. Now, there are certain other institutional changes that has also been suggested. Equitable and inclusive education, special emphasis on socially and educationally disadvantaged groups, robust and transparent procedure for recruitment of teachers, holistic multidisciplinary education with multiple entry-exit options, and very importantly, creation of an academic bank of credits, or ABC as it is called. Setting up of multidisciplinary education and research universities, and focus is on light but tight regulation. Professional education will be an integral part of higher educational system. This is not all. NEP 2020 also focuses on special educational systems for persons with disabilities. NEP 2020 focuses on a barrier-free access to education for all children with disabilities. In order to facilitate this new addition made in the NEP, assistive devices, appropriate technology-based tools, and language-appropriate teaching learning materials will be made available. Considering that the children with benchmark disabilities shall have the choice of regular or special schooling as per the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, resource centers along with special educators and trainers will be made available to cater to various rehabilitation and educational needs of students and to address their multiple disabilities. So far we have studied the 1968, 1986 and the latest 2020 educational policies. What can we summarize from today's discussion? Welfare policies, whether it is education or employment, reflect an ongoing effort to balance two major objectives. One, reducing poverty and reducing dependency. Reformers on both sides favor these goals but disagree on which should receive priority and the effective measures to achieve them. However, one thing is clear from all the educational policies that the country has pursued from time to time, that the purpose of national educational policies is not just to bring about holistic education, but also to ensure accessibility of education, retention of children in schools, and at the same time to ensure that educated youth can contribute to be a part of the trained workforce in the country. Educational policies can serve their vision and purpose only when education meets the goal of the industry as well as educated youth become a part of the global workforce. Thank you.